How did this simple chair, way back 200 years ago, make this English peasant woman so famous? At the time, no one could have guessed that such a terrifying ordeal could be marked in history the way it was. First of all, let's look at the chair. Going back as far as 800 years ago, it would have been on wheels, and it would have been used as a punishment for some misdemeanor. A person would have been strapped in and paraded through the streets where they lived. The crowd, with great enthusiasm, would have laughed and shouted abuse at them. It was the ultimate humiliation. Originally known as the cucking stool, it gets its name from an old word, cucken, or to cack, which basically means to go to the toilet. The stool was used for both men and women, and misdemeanors could be anything from selling badly made bread to being a public nuisance. One unscrupulous practice by merchants was to sell a pig at market. It would be put in a hessian bag, but when the hapless customer got it home, they discovered it was a cat and not a juicy fat pig. Hence the saying, let the cat out of the bag, or let out a secret. This would certainly have landed the merchant on the cucking stool. But it wasn't long before this type of punishment was focused primarily on women, and in particular women that were considered outspoken. They were called scolds. A scold could be someone who was unruly, quarrelsome, or just a gossip. A fine was quite normal, but occasionally the punishment was the stool, and rather than just a parade through the streets, a little dunking in the local river was added as the grand finale. Jeering crowds really had something to look forward to at the end. The water was meant to dampen the scold's tongue, and of course their spirit. The number of plunges was specified by the magistrate, based on the severity of the scolding. It was not meant to be fatal, just humiliating and embarrassing. It certainly would have made the entire event very exciting for the crowd, but they had to be careful not to get carried away. If the woman did not survive, members of the crowd could be held responsible and would face dire consequences themselves. So back to this woman. Her name was Jenny Pipes, and she lived in a small English town. It's said she was educated and smart. She even taught herself French, which would have been quite unusual. She was mother to Henry and Tilda, but the family were very poor, and she was desperately unhappy with her lot. She blamed her husband John, and probably for good reason. He enjoyed a drink. A lot. The last straw for her was when he came home drunk one night, but on the way back from the pub, he was shot at by a landowner for trespass. This was it for Jenny. She told him and everyone else what she really thought of him. Unfortunately for Jenny, this didn't go down too well with John's brother. The family lived in his house, and he wasn't going to put up with Jenny's complaining and bad-mouthing his brother. So he reported her to the local magistrate, saying she was a scold. You can see where this is going, can't you? Now the magistrate, he was really irritated with the tediousness of this matter. Perhaps he thought he had more important things to do, or maybe he just got out of bed the wrong side. Either way, he decided to make an example of poor Jenny. He ordered for her to be taken on the stool, through the streets, to the river to be ducked. And the route he chose would go directly past Jenny's house. He was going for maximum humiliation. So the chair was brought out. It hadn't been used for many years, and Jenny was strapped in. Off they went, through the narrow streets towards the river. There was a big crowd. This was before Netflix, so there wasn't much in the form of entertainment. This would have been a big event for the small town. Lining the streets, they screamed, "Duck the scold! Duck the scold!" Finally, they arrived at the river. The chair was dropped into the icy water, once, then twice. But both times, spirited Jenny came up gasping for air, but also hurling abuse at the magistrate that was watching. This just wasn't working. The idea was to calm and subdue the offender, take the fire from her mouth. But Jenny wasn't having any of it. It just made her more angry. After just 2 plunges, the crowd had lost interest and began to disperse. They'd had their fun for the day. At this point, the ducking was abandoned and Jenny was freed. Looking for a positive, you might think at least Jenny had had a bath of sorts. In the 1800s, most people would only have 1 bath a year. Yes, 1 in an entire year. In fact, that's where the tradition of the bride having a bouquet of flowers comes from, to create a pleasant aroma around her, and that's why weddings usually happened in the spring. This was the time for most people to have their annual bath. But sadly, it's believed that Jenny passed away soon after, possibly from the polluted water she would have swallowed. The entire spectacle with Jenny had been a failure, but it did become infamous because it was the last time a woman was ever to be ducked in a river in England. So Jenny and her fiery spirit are marked in history, synonymous with the ducking stool. There was one more attempt with the stool some years later with a woman called Sarah Leake, another scold, but the water level in the river was too low for a proper ducking, and it too was abandoned. The crowd must have been so disappointed. And even though there hasn't been a ducking for 200 years, the law to abolish it as a punishment was only changed in the 1960s. This is actually a replica of the chair used for Jenny, but still quite a formidable looking contraption.